Hello everybody, this is Kate at the Library of Whispers, and today I'm going to read you chapter 4 from my ghost story mystery, Hallows House. This is called The Clock. We followed Sue back up to the reading room. She motioned for us to sit down at one of the oak tables and left to find the old book. Rachel sat staring at her phone, mesmerised by the images she had taken of Elizabeth Pike's painting. "What do you think this is all about, Mum?" she asked. "You mean her likeness to you?" I answered. "Or my likeness to her," answered Rachel. "Either way, I'm seriously spooked. The stranger that came to our door mistook me for her. Do you remember? It's just a coincidence, though, isn't it?" I was just about to say that I thought it definitely was, when Sue came back to the table and placed a large leather-bound book in front of Rachel. "Here it is," she said, standing at Rachel's side. She carefully opened the book and slowly traced her finger down the first page of text. The book was written by the Reverend Charles Griffin and published in 1901 by Clarence Griffin and Son Limited, publishers of London. "Is he the man connected to Elizabeth Pike?" "Yes," answered Rachel emphatically, "the very same." "And Clarence Griffin?" I asked, leaning over to look at the page. "Wasn't he one of the Reverend's brothers?" "I think so," said Rachel. "Hold on." She reached into her satchel and pulled out the old brown envelope. Sifting through the various papers inside, she took out the newspaper report of Elizabeth Pike's engagement ball. "Here they all are," she said, "the 4 brothers of the Reverend Charles. They all attended the ball. Remember, Mum, you noted how all the brothers' names began with a C?" I nodded. "There's Lieutenant Cornelius Griffin, presumably a military man," said Rachel. "Then we have Dr. Cuthbert Griffin, who attended to the mayor's wife when she took ill on that evening, and after that, Clarence Griffin, who we now know was a book publisher. Then, the last brother mentioned is Cecil Griffin, but no clue is yet to his occupation." "Actually, I think I may be able to help you out there," said Sue, who had already turned over the next 2 pages of the book. "Look at this frontispiece image. It's a rather lovely painting of the old hall, by Cecil Griffin, Esquire." "Wow, so Cecil was an artist," said Rachel, staring at the picture. Sue nodded. "Apparently," she said. "If you like, I can check out our collections database to see if we have anything else by Cecil Griffin." "That would be great," said Rachel, as she continued to leaf through the volume. I'll leave you to it then," said Sue. Rachel turned to me after Sue had gone. "You know, I need to start making notes. This is getting complicated. All these names, family connections, possible murder suspects." Let's not be too hasty, Rach," I said. "The person who murdered Elizabeth Pike might not have been known to her." "But that's unlikely, isn't it?" said Rachel. "Statistically, most people are murdered by those they know, and the housekeeper said that there were 2 people with Elizabeth Pike that night. She invited them in, so she must have known who they were." "But they might have nothing to do with the murder," I said. Rachel shrugged. "At this point, who knows?" As she turned over a couple more pages of the book, I spotted something. "Is that a picture of our house?" I said. "Yes, it is," she said, pushing the book towards me. "It's a lot grander looking in this picture," I said, smiling. "How fascinating." It was obviously drawn when it was all one house, said Rachel. But look, the front door in the picture is our front door. Next door's entrance must have been added later. What does the text say underneath? I asked. Rachel pulled the book towards her and read, Hallows House, Orchard Road, Monksferry, 1900. Drawn by Cecil Griffin, Esquire. Another picture by Cecil, I said. Yes, she said, and there's a description underneath. It says, Hallows House, built in the grounds of the Old Hall in 1873 by Ebenezer and Joseph Pike, after the death of their sister Elizabeth. A dedication stone to her memory can be found on the 17th century fountain, which originally stood in the orchard of the Old Hall and now forms part of the Hallows House estate. Estate? I exclaimed. We only have a small back garden, and I haven't seen a fountain. I wonder if it's next door. It must be, said Rachel, if it still exists. We really must speak to our neighbours, Mum. We should probably invite them around for tea. Make their acquaintance, I said. For tea? Rachel laughed. Mum, you sound like you're from the 19th century yourself. What's wrong with tea? I laughed. I'll make cake. Rachel grinned. Well, one way or another, we need to have a chat with them. They might know more about the history of the house and the fountain. I'd love to see that. I nodded, and Rachel continued reading. The house is currently occupied by the Messrs. Pike and retains a grand drawing room, library, other small reception rooms, 10 bedrooms, servants' quarters, and a wine cellar. Mum, we have a wine cellar, she exclaimed. No, I answered, smiling. We might have a wine cellar. That also may be next door. It'll just be our luck if the neighbours have all the best bits, she said. I laughed. Well, we know we have the grand drawing room at least, I said, even if it isn't as grand as it used to be. That's true, she said with a smirk, and then, as she turned the next page, a loose piece of paper slipped out of the book and onto the floor. She bent over and picked it up. What's that? I said. It's a scrap of paper. It looks like some handwritten notes, she answered. Oh, wait, this is interesting. It looks like somebody was here before us doing some of their own research on our house. The writing's a bit small and untidy, but it says, Hallows House, inherited by Sylvester Scullion, after death of Pike Brothers, 1920. Now there's another name that rings a bell, I said. Rachel rummaged in the brown envelope again and brought out another newspaper clipping. I think he was at Elizabeth's funeral, said Rachel, scanning the report. Yeah, here it is. It says, servants of the Old Hall, including Mr. Sylvester Scullion, house steward. He inherited Hallows House? I asked, puzzled. I'm sure Stanley Fogg told me that the house was sold after the brothers died. Maybe he was wrong, said Rachel. True, but that's an awful lot of property for a house steward to inherit, don't you think? Rachel nodded in agreement. He must have been more than a servant. Was he related to them, or a family friend, maybe? Does the note say anything else? I asked. Yes, it says, H. House, divided, 1921, Scullion family, reside number 9, other side rented, and then it says in brackets, names unknown, current occupant of number 9, Beatrice Scullion, niece of S. Scullion. So, Beatrice Scullion was possibly the last occupant before us. Is the note dated by any chance? Rachel turned the paper over. Well, kind of, she laughed. She passed the paper to me and I smiled. The note had been written on the back of a flyer for a local cafe, Fogg's Cafe, where we'd enjoyed our Danish pastries an hour before. In the advert, the cafe was enticing local diners to Grab a great British breakfast at Fogg's for under a fiver. Limited offer, closes end of November 2017. 2 extra sausages, only 50p more. Looks like the note-taker, whoever it was, looked at this book exactly a year ago, said Rachel, and it seems they had a good breakfast beforehand. I wonder if they took advantage of the extra sausage, I laughed. I would have, said Rachel. At that moment, Sue returned with the collections register under her arm. You both sound as though you're enjoying your research, she said, smiling. Hope we're not being too loud, said Rachel, handing the flyer to Sue. We found this in the book. There are some notes on the back about our house. It's just another reader's scrap piece of paper. You can keep it if the notes on the back are useful, said Sue. I will, thanks, said Rachel, stuffing it into the brown envelope with everything else. Sue sat down at the table with a notebook and pen. You'll be interested to know that we do hold a few items by the artist Cecil Griffin. I think the first one is particularly relevant. The oil portrait of Elizabeth Pike that we've just seen was painted by Cecil, and it's dated December 1872. Wow, said Rachel, that's only a few weeks after she died. Interesting, said Sue, although it's likely that the portrait was begun before her death, perhaps to mark a special occasion. It looks to me as though it was originally modelled from life. Also, these paintings could take months to complete. Meaning that he must have finished it after her death, I asked. Yes, the date suggests that, she answered. And the special occasion must have been her engagement to the Reverend Charles, said Rachel, although she doesn't look that happy in the painting. Maybe it was painted for another reason then, I said. Either way, it's sad that she never saw it completed. Sue nodded and then looked down at her notes. We do have a few other things, she said. There is a sketchbook of Cecil's, a couple of journals, and a few loose drawings. You might want to see them. Journals, exclaimed Rachel. Now that could be very interesting. There might be something in there about Elizabeth's death. It's possible, said Sue, looking at the dates she'd jotted down. They loosely cover the period from 1871 up to 1901, when, according to the database, Cecil Griffin died. Would you like me to get them? Yes, definitely, answered Rachel. I checked my watch. Look, Rach, I'm going to leave you to get on with this. I really should be getting back to the house. The plumber is coming around to connect the washing machine around lunchtime. Yeah, okay, I'll stay for a while. See you later, she said. I said my goodbyes to Sue and left the library. Wandering back through the town and past Catlow Cottages, where Stanley Fogg had said he lived, I thought about knocking at number 2, Stanley's home, for that chat he'd offered. Then I thought better of it. The plumber had to come first. I made my way down to the bottom of Orchard Road and stood for a moment outside our new house, taking it in with fresh eyes and musing on the information we'd learned about the former Hallows House. Just as I was about to go in, the door of number 7 opened, and an elderly man wrapped in a thick overcoat and scarf came out. He turned and acknowledged my presence with a nod. Oh, hello, I said. I'm your new neighbour. I know, he answered. My name is... I began, but he waved his arm impatiently at me. I don't wish to be rude, but I'm late, he said, locking his front door and turning to walk down his garden path. Oh, sorry, I said, wondering in the back of my mind why I was apologising for his rudeness. As he was walking away from me, I had a sudden thought and shouted after him, Oh, would you like to come to tea tomorrow afternoon? I have cake. At first he ignored me and continued walking, and I felt a bit of a fool for asking. Then, as I was about to put the key in the front door, he turned and shouted back, Will it be Bakewell tart? A bit flummoxed, I replied. Bakewell tart? Yes, I suppose so. Then I'll be there about 3, he answered, turning and continuing his journey. A few hours later, I received a text on my phone from Rachel, who said she was going for a meal and drinks with her library colleagues and would probably be back late. I text back her, "No probs, see you later, Mum, kiss," and settled myself in for an evening alone. All was dark outside, so I closed the curtains, turned the television on low, and curled up on the sofa with a home design magazine and a steaming mug of hot chocolate. I was leafing through the pages, looking for creative inspiration, when I was startled again by the sudden loud chimes of the old clock in the hallway. "That bloody clock," I cried, throwing my magazine on the coffee table and standing up. This time I was determined to turn it off, mute it, or whatever you were supposed to do with old clocks to shut them up. I turned on the hallway light and looked at it. It was quite an imposing thing. It towered over me, as it must have been at least 7 foot tall. It was made of a dark reddish wood that looked like mahogany. It had a large square brass face, which was obscured by a dirty glass door, and underneath that was the long body of its case, which I presumed held its workings. Another loud bong made me jump, so I marched into the kitchen, grabbed a torch from the cupboard under the sink, and went back to face the clock. With the light from the torch, I could now see some fine decoration carved into the wooden case. I had to be honest, despite my annoyance with it, this really was a beautifully made thing. I couldn't understand why Rachel called it ugly. At its top were 2 carved wooden scrolls resembling swans' necks, and underneath them there was a roaring lion's head, complete with flowing mane and pointy teeth. There were other decorative designs, but I needed some height to get a better look at them. 5 minutes later, standing precariously atop a kitchen stool with a torch in my mouth, I tentatively opened the glass door that protected the clock's brass face. Underneath the fancy hour and minute hands there was an inscription: Daniel O'Neill, Dublin, and the year 1757. "Well, look at that," I said to the clock. "I had no idea you were that old." It didn't reply, which I was grateful for. Above the inscription were 2 round holes, which I deduced had something to do with the winding mechanism. But surely it can't have been wound for ages. Even if Mrs. Locke had been fiddling with it, as Rachel had suggested, it would have wound itself down by now. And if that was the case, why was it still making random chimes? I decided that it must be faulty. It was the only explanation. I was about to get down from the stool when the front door swung open abruptly and a rush of cold air entered the hallway. I flinched and nearly lost my balance. "Mum, what on earth are you doing up there?" said Rachel. "Hell, Rach, do you have to come in like that?" "Like what?" she asked, looking perplexed. "Do you have to be so loud? I thought you were going to be late." "Yeah, me too. Doreen had a migraine, so we decided to call it a day," she said. "More importantly, what are you doing up there?" I got down from the stool and carried it back into the kitchen. Rachel followed me, still waiting for an answer. "I was trying to turn the clock off. It's been on another noisy rampage," I said, as Rachel began removing her coat. "Turn it off?" she asked. "Is it possible to turn off a wind-up clock?" "Rachel, I have no idea," I answered. "I was trying to work that out." "Have you opened up the pendulum case?" she asked. "Since when did you become an expert in old clocks?" "I'm only trying to help, Mum," she said. "There might be something inside it. A switch or something? She took my torch and walked back into the hallway. Did you get to see Cecil Griffin's journals? I asked, following her. No, she said, peering closely at the tiny lock in the clock's pendulum case door. It was frustrating, really. Sue couldn't find the box containing his archive of things. She said it must have been misfiled. Oh, that's a disappointment, I said. Yeah, she's going to keep looking for me, though. I'm sure it'll be found. Then looking up at me, Rachel added, well, the case is locked. However, there's a key in the lock, which means it won't stay that way for much longer. Ah, I missed that, I said. OK, open the blooming thing and let's see if we can turn it off before we go to bed. I won't be happy if it wakes me in the night. Mum, chill, seriously, said Rachel as she turned the tiny brass key. It made a satisfying click and the door opened. She peered inside. The light of the torch picked up 2 long brass pendulums, which looked as though they hadn't moved for many years. The only other thing of note was a distinctively musty odour emanating from inside. Oh, it smells, said Rachel, holding her nose. Well, it's ancient. Poke about a bit with your hand, I said. See if there's anything else in there. She screwed up her face and tentatively placed one hand inside the clock. There might be spiders, she said suddenly, removing her hand. Well, they'll all be dead spiders by now. I don't think this clock has been opened for a long time if the odour is anything to go by. Well, that doesn't reassure me, said Rachel, reaching inside again. Anything there? I asked after a minute. Actually, there is something here, at the bottom, she answered. It's not a switch or anything, but there's something sticking up, a bit of wood. Mum, can you hold the torch so that I can get a good grip on this? I took the torch and pointed it back into the dark recess. Rachel tugged on the piece of raised wood and a small panel came away in her hands, revealing a hidden space below. This is probably where all the spiders are congregated, she said, wincing. She placed her hand into the void. What's this? She said, pulling out an old cardboard folder. Getting to her feet with the folder in her hands, we stared incredulously at it and then at each other. What on earth? I said to Rachel. She shrugged and wiped her sleeve over the folder's cover to remove a layer of dust. In a fine, decorative hand it read, Property of Miss Beatrice Scullion. Confidential. And that ends chapter 4. Next we'll read chapter 5. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.